Anne Heche lived out loud, on screen and off, and left behind work that still demands a second look. Richard Lewis spent decades turning anxiety into art, and every comedian doing confessional stand-up today owes him something. Ray Stevenson. Commanding, underrated, gone too soon. Robbie Coltrane brought Hagrid to life for an entire generation of children, and that role will outlast all of us. Bob Saget was funnier than America's funniest home videos let on, and the people who knew him best never stopped saying so. Michael Jackson changed what pop music looked like, sounded like, and moved like, and the industry has been chasing that standard ever since. These are people whose stories are finished. The files are closed. There is a moment in 2023 that says everything. Madonna walks onto a stage in Montreal, nearly 2 hours late, in front of an arena of fans who have waited, some of them for years, for the celebration tour. She is 65 years old. She has survived a near-fatal bacterial infection that put her in intensive care only months before, and she performs for 3 hours. No apology, no softening, no farewell energy, just the show. That is the version of Madonna that the industry never quite figured out how to price. Not the icon in amber, not the legend graciously accepting a lifetime achievement plaque. The one who keeps going and keeps insisting on her own terms. By the time most artists reach their 60s, critics have already written the retrospective. The story is sealed. The Wikipedia lead is tidy. But Madonna's story resists that tidiness, and the resistance itself is part of what she built. Start then, not at the beginning, but at what already exists in the record. Madonna Louise Ciccone has sold an estimated 300 million records worldwide, making her the best-selling female recording artist in history, according to Guinness World Records. That number is not a tribute. It is a market fact. It reflects radio play, catalog streaming, physical sales across 4 decades of a format-shifting industry and a fan base that has renewed itself across generations. When younger listeners discover Like a Prayer or Ray of Light through streaming playlists or film soundtracks, they are not discovering a museum piece. They are discovering something that still sounds like it was built to last. But the record sales are the least interesting part of what she did. What Madonna changed, structurally, permanently, was the operating logic of pop stardom for women. Before her commercial peak in the mid-1980s, the standard arrangement was clear. A female pop artist recorded the songs her label selected, wore what the stylists approved, and gave interviews calibrated to protect a particular image. The machine decided. Donna Summer, Olivia Newton-John, Cyndi Lauper, all talented, all commercially significant, but all working within a system that held the final cut. Madonna took the final cut. She co-wrote, she co-produced, she negotiated, she fired people. She created Maverick Records in 1992 as a joint venture with Time Warner, not a vanity imprint, a real label, and used it to sign and develop artists on her own terms. Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill, one of the best-selling albums of the 1990 seconds, came through Maverick. That is not a footnote. That is a business decision with a measurable downstream effect on the careers of other artists. When people talk about female artists owning their work, owning their image, owning their business, the infrastructure that Madonna built in the early 1990 seconds is part of what made that conversation possible. She also changed what pop videos were allowed to be. Like a Prayer in 1989 was not just a music video, it was a deliberate provocation, burning crosses, a black saint, sexual and religious imagery colliding in 4 minutes of 35mm film. Pepsi pulled a $30 million sponsorship contract over it within 48 hours. Madonna kept the money she had already been paid and released the video anyway. The song went to #1 in multiple countries. The lesson the industry took was not that controversy pays, exactly. The lesson was that an artist with enough leverage and enough conviction could absorb the cost of a sponsor's panic and come out ahead. That calculus influenced how artists and their management have thought about brand partnerships ever since. The visual language she established across the 1980 seconds and 1990 seconds, the repurposing of Catholic iconography, the deliberate gender bending, the corsetry worn as outerwear, did not stay in the videos. It traveled. Designers cite her. Jean-Paul Gaultier's cone bra, created for the 1990 Blonde Ambition World Tour, became one of the most referenced garments in fashion history. Versace, Dolce & Gabbana, Gianni himself, all of them had professional relationships with Madonna at the peak of her cultural moment that shaped what luxury fashion thought it could do with pop music. The pipeline between high fashion and pop that now seems obvious, the one that puts Kendall Jenner in Versace campaigns and Beyoncé on the cover of Vogue, runs through choices Madonna made when almost no one in fashion wanted to be photographed next to a pop star. The Blonde Ambition tour itself deserves its own paragraph because it changed what a concert was supposed to do. In 1990, concert tours were still largely organized around performance. The artist sang, the band played, the lights moved, the audience cheered. Blonde Ambition introduced something closer to a music-driven theater piece with choreography, narrative, costume changes, and thematic architecture. Bob Fosse's influence was visible in the staging. Dancers had roles, not just steps. The show had a point of view about gender, sexuality, power, and religion, and it expressed that point of view through staging rather than interviews. Rolling Stone named it one of the greatest concert tours of all time. Subsequent stadium-scale productions, from Beyoncé's Formation World Tour to Lady Gaga's Monster Ball, owe a visible structural debt to what Blonde Ambition demonstrated was possible. The Sex Book and Erotica album in 1992 are often discussed as the moment Madonna overreached. The commercial response was more complicated than that narrative suggests. Erotica sold 4 million copies. The Sex Book, a coffee table volume containing explicit photographs and text, sold 1.5 million copies in its first week, setting a record for the fastest-selling coffee table book in publishing history at that time. MTV refused to play the Erotica video. Several radio stations declined to add it. The mainstream press wrote extensively about audience fatigue. What actually happened is that Madonna ran an experiment about the boundaries of the mainstream at a specific cultural moment. The early years of the HIV and AIDS crisis, when gay sexuality was being actively politicized and suppressed. And she ran that experiment publicly with her name on it and absorbed the commercial consequences while refusing to retract. The book included explicit images of gay men and addressed AIDS directly at a time when major entertainers were largely silent on the subject. The Village Voice, The Advocate, and subsequent academic treatments of the period have documented the political significance of that choice. It cost her pop chart momentum for approximately 2 years. She came back with Take a Bow in 1994, which became her longest-running #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100. And then Ray of Light in 1998 effectively restarted the critical conversation about her entirely. Ray of Light, produced with William Orbit, is the album that demonstrated something about Madonna that her detractors had consistently underestimated. She was listening. She was absorbing. She had spent time studying electronic music, Kabbalah, yoga, and motherhood. And she made an album that sounded like all of those things processed through someone who genuinely understood them. It won 4 Grammy Awards, including Best Pop Album. Pitchfork has since listed it among the most important pop albums of the 1990 seconds. It introduced a generation of listeners who were teenagers in the late 90s, people who are now in their late 30s and early 40s and actively shape culture, to a version of Madonna that felt emotionally present rather than strategically calculated. That oscillation between strategic and vulnerable, between armored and open, is actually the engine of her longevity. Every few years, she creates conditions for her own reinvention by choosing a collaborator who pulls something out of her that the previous phase had not accessed. Orbit for Ray of Light. Miwais Ahmadzai for Music and American Life. Stuart Price for Confessions on a Dance Floor. Pharrell Williams and Diplo for Hard Candy and MDNA Sessions. Each of those choices reflects an artist who is genuinely curious about where pop music is going and willing to be a student of it, not just a consumer. Confessions on a Dance Floor in 2005 is worth pausing on. Madonna was 47 years old. The conventional industry wisdom about female artists in their late 40s, to the extent anyone was even having that conversation seriously, was that they transitioned to legacy mode, classic albums tours, acoustic reimaginings. Instead, she made a continuous, no-gap club record, influenced by Giorgio Moroder and the Eurodisco she had danced to in New York in the late 1970 seconds, and it debuted at #1 in 40 countries. Hung Up, the lead single, built on an ABBA sample, a sample that ABBA had famously refused to license to any other artist until Madonna asked, became one of the fastest-rising singles in chart history across multiple territories. 47 years old, #1 in 40 countries. That does not happen by accident or nostalgia. It happens because the artist understood what the dance floor needed in 2005 and delivered it with precision. The tours have consistently been the highest-grossing in live music history at multiple points in her career. The Sticky and Sweet Tour in 2008 and 2009 grossed over $408 million, making it the highest-grossing tour by a solo artist at that time. The MDNA Tour in 2012 grossed $305 million. These are not vanity projects. They are large-scale logistical and creative operations that employ hundreds of people, generate significant local economic activity in every city they visit, and demonstrate an ongoing capacity to fill the largest venues on Earth. Live Nation's relationship with Madonna, a reported $120 million deal signed in 2007, restructured how the industry thought about artist-label relationships in the streaming era, shifting emphasis toward live revenue. She directed W.E. in 2011 and has spoken extensively about her interest in filmmaking and storytelling. She has faced criticism for that film and for other projects. She has also been criticized for virtually everything else at various points by various constituencies, often in contradictory directions. Too sexual, not sexual enough. Too political, not political enough. Appropriating culture, abandoning culture. Aging visibly. Aging with surgical assistance. The consistency of the criticism across 40 years and the consistency of her continuation through it is itself a form of data. The Celebration Tour, which she launched after recovering from her 2023 hospitalization, became, after a delayed start, one of the most attended tours of her career. The Brooklyn and Los Angeles arena dates were extended due to demand. Reviews noted that the set design, the choreography, and the emotional arc of the show were among the most ambitious of her touring life. She performed Live to Tell as a solo spotlight. She performed Like a Prayer with a gospel choir. She moved through 50 years of popular culture in 3 hours and made it feel like it was all connected, because it was. What the Celebration Tour did, beyond the box office, was force a recalibration. Here was someone who had influenced Beyoncé, who has cited Madonna's touring production and visual language as a direct reference, performing to full arenas in her mid-60s, not as nostalgia, not as a farewell, but as a living demonstration of what she had built and how much of it still held structural weight. Artists who name Madonna as a direct influence or reference include Lady Gaga, who has discussed her openly in multiple interviews, Cardi B, who has cited her boundary-pushing approach to image, Rihanna, whose visual albums and Super Bowl production borrowed structural elements from Madonna's established playbook, and Charli XCX, whose pop art approach to self-image reflects a lineage that runs directly through the early 1990s Madonna era. These are not polite acknowledgements. They are genealogical. The academic conversation around Madonna is also real and not trivial. Cultural theorist Bell Hooks wrote about her. Camille Paglia wrote a famous essay defending her in the early 1990s, at a moment when she was being widely dismissed. Susan McClary's musicological analysis of her work is taught in university music programs. She is not just a pop artifact. She is a case study in agency, commerce, image, and the politics of female performance that researchers are still actively working through. At 65, Madonna is not in retrospective mode. She is in whatever the next mode is. The biopic she has been developing, a project she was writing and planning to direct herself, has been an ongoing conversation in Hollywood. Her catalogue remains in active commercial play. She continues to perform, to generate opinions, and to refuse the comfortable position of elder stateswoman that the culture keeps trying to assign her. The story, as of now, does not have an ending. That is the point. The legends who came before, the ones whose legacies are already sealed, whose stories are already being retold in documentaries and tribute concerts, they built things that endure. So did Madonna. The difference is that she is still in the room, still arguing, still performing, still deciding what the next chapter is. That is what 40-plus years of documented, measurable, argued-over impact looks like when the subject is still alive to keep building it.